comments through the webinar. So we're going to launch the first poll, which is, what is your level of experience with cloud computing? And you only get one here. So if you've used Amazon, that's the first one. If you've used both Amazon with RightScale, click on that one. If you've used another cloud infrastructure, or if you have no experience with cloud computing. They're starting to come in now. It looks like a fair number of people have used Amazon and Amazon. Some have used RightScale. A lot of people with no experience yet. So lots of possibilities for you guys with no experience. Can they see the poll? There it goes. Okay, so we have, yeah, about equal. People who have had some experience with Amazon and people who have had no experience. So do we want to launch the second one? Okay, so we assume that a lot of you, because the topic here is test and development, are interested in that. But we also wanted to find out what else you might be interested in. So you might be looking at putting a website on the cloud that can scale with demand, or doing some processing using our grid computing option. A lot of people now are doing scientific research or just general business applications. Some BI applications we're starting to see on the cloud. Okay, so it looks like by definition we have a lot of people interested in test and dev, and then the scalable website would be the second. Okay, we've got one final. And this is, we did assume that you are coming here to hear about test and dev in the cloud. So we wanted to find out if you're trying to expand what you're doing already in terms of test and dev, or you're trying to create a completely new environment on the cloud. Okay, so a lot, it looks like as they're coming in, a lot of people creating brand new test and development environments on the cloud. And we've got customers now who are doing this, saving significant amounts of money. So with this, let's close up the polls and let me introduce who will be the speakers today. Okay, so we've got a lot of people presenting here. Martin Burr is going to kick it off. He is the European Business Director at Amazon Web Services. Patrick Kirpin is joining us. He's the CTO from Cohesive. Right next to me here I have Michael Crandell, who is our CEO and one of the founders of RightScale. And then online we have Ed Goldberg, who is an evangelist for RightScale and helps us out. He'll be doing the demo today. And then online, Martin and Patrick will help with Q&A. And then we also have two of our account managers, Matt Small and Andrew DeMille. They are ready to answer your questions, so don't wait. Go ahead and ask questions in the chat window in the bottom right of your screen, and we will answer them as we go. And then at the end, we'll open up Q&A, a live Q&A session, and we'll some of the more interesting ones and answer them live.
It's not the chat window. I want people to put their questions.
Okay, so at this point, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Betsy. Greetings, everybody. A quick overview of what we'll be covering today, subject-wise. So first of all, we're going to call on Martin Burr from Amazon to give a very brief intro to cloud computing. About a third of you are fairly new to the subject, so Martin's going to cover from really, since Amazon was the pioneer in infrastructure in the cloud space, he'll cover a quick intro as well as what's so useful about using cloud computing for test and development. I'll say a few words about cloud management and what makes sense in having a cloud management platform. Then Patrick will cover an overview of Cohesive FT's VPN Cube product. And then right after that, we're going to dive into a live demo, and then followed by a Q&A. So you will be able to see an actual live demo today of the VPN Cube product running in the RightScale environment on top of Amazon Web Services. Before we dive into Martin's portion, wanted to give a quick sneak preview of what we'll be showing you today. Ed Goldberg, I'd like to invite you to just give a quick taste so we can see what everybody will be able to see you demo live later on.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Michael. My name is Ed Goldberg. I'll be showing you a quick peek here of what we're going to see after the slideware is over. We're going to dive into launching real servers right now live during the show, during the webinar. We're going to launch several servers both to provide for a developer, both a small and a large server, a single and a dual CPU server, to do some test and development in the cloud. We're also going to dive into VPN Cubed and how to do secure overlay networks, which allow us to compute and talk between clouds. We're going to launch servers in the EU and then the US and have them communicate over a separate tunneled VPN network. Very exciting stuff. We'll log into a few servers and see what it's like to launch servers in the cloud. So back to you, Crandell. It's a little more slides and a little more in depth, and then we'll do a demo where we detail actually showing you how to launch these servers in the cloud.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks very much, Ed. That's going to be exciting. So now, live from Berlin, I'd like to introduce Martin Burr from Amazon Web Services. Martin, take us through intro to cloud computing and test and dev on AWS.
Thanks, Michael. So welcome everyone to the webinar. So at a high level, Amazon Web Services is a new business that Amazon started, well, not so new now, about 4 years ago. And this was a business that we created to service both our internal IT needs. So Amazon is a customer of Amazon Web Services. This is not us reusing excess capacity. This is a new business that we invested in from the ground up with its own infrastructure. And it's really to meet both the kind of diverse, very demanding IT needs that we see internally, everything from serving the website to doing deep analytics of customer data to serving and delivering media, to the diverse needs of external customers ranging from some of the most compelling startups to some of the largest enterprise customers in the world. This is really IT infrastructure as on-demand building blocks. So, in a way, this is sort of like IT infrastructure like electricity. When the lights are on, you pay, and when they're off, you don't. It also offers really levels of scalability, durability, and security that are really unparalleled in the IT space, which is why there's such a lot of excitement about cloud computing. Didn't realize that there'd be animation supported, so if you could click a couple times on in terms of who's got control of the presentation, there should be some other sort of images there. So first of all, the first two pieces that we brought out were storage and servers, the two sort of raw building blocks, Amazon EC2 and Amazon S3. Both these services are GA. They have SLAs around them. They're used heavily, again, for startups and enterprises. But we've then iterated on those by offering things like load balancing and auto-scaling for EC2, physical ingestion or digestion, and digestion with S3. This is the ability to ship us very large data sets or to have us ship you back very large data sets over physical media. If you could click again, please. And then to complement those, we've rolled out a number of other building blocks. And again, from our perspective, these are the raw components out of which you can build almost any application, which is why we see such broad adoption of our services across a lot of different verticals. So we have queuing and simple queue service, a service for doing massive batch processing of big data sets in Amazon Elastic MapReduce. So this is Hadoop as a service, if you're familiar with Hadoop. Amazon Simple Database, which is a massively scalable, geographically distributed query and indexing engine, because internally at Amazon we have a lot of data sets that are just too big for a relational database, and if you think about the Amazon catalog, it's one such data set. And then over the years we've learned a lot about dealing with customer demand across the globe, and so we leverage that expertise to deliver our own CDN called Amazon CloudFront. Next slide. So could you, there we go. In terms of why we hear customers using our services, it really revolves around both cost reductions. So when you can treat your IT infrastructure like a variable cost as opposed to a fixed cost with great architecture and great tools like RightScale and Cohesive FT, you can scale that up and down in response to load and get really interesting cost savings. Most IT infrastructure is utilized at under 15%, and you can push that utilization up to extremely high levels using this kind of flexible, durable, secure infrastructure. It also delivers unparalleled business agility. So the fact, the ability to respond to customer demand, whether that's internal customers inside your own company or external customers, is, again, really unmatched. I mean, the folks from RightScale have just one success story with a single customer called Animoto that is just shows the sort of power of that, the ability to go from 40 servers to over 4,000 in 36 hours. That kind of scalability is not something that any IT organization that I'm aware of can deal with, especially unforecasted. And then the third area is really around focus, and that's around the ability, especially in tough times, of having your IT staff, having your company as a whole really focus on creating differentiated business value instead of focusing on things or burning up cycles and funding on things that your customers don't care about. So your customers don't care, but you're really good at installing new racks or dealing with outages or renegotiating your bandwidth agreement. Your customers really care about a differentiated service. Next slide. So dev and test is one area where it's extremely common for customers to get started, and it's one area where we see cloud computing and the tools layered on top of cloud computing deliver immediate business value. So this just shows a very high-level sort of abstracted view of having Amazon EC2 with the security wrapped around that, the ability to bring up within minutes server or servers for development and testing projects, and then having that using the cohesive FT solution appear as it, both from a security and from a manageability perspective, as though it's inside your own data center. Oftentimes, dev and test in an organization is a bottleneck. There's always projects queued up waiting to get out the door based on the dev and test fleet. And also, typically the dev and test fleet is kind of the red-headed stepchild. It's the older boxes that sit in the basement. And so the fact that you can spin up, again, boxes or fleets of servers in minutes, configure those with a standard set of software, and then test against those, really makes IT organizations much more responsive to the needs of the business, and then, again, gets those projects out the door a lot quicker so that they start adding value to the business. Next slide. Another area where we see is this kind of, I'm sorry, can you go back one, please? So another area we see a lot of enterprises getting started is in using our services as using EC2. This is a service that provides servers on demand as a sandbox environment for common packaged applications. Again, you can use cohesive FT to wrapper those applications in the cloud with the security such they appear as part of your own data center infrastructure. And this is an area, again, where even for, when you move away from startups into very large organizations, it adds immediate business value and agility to the business. Next slide. Once you developed your application, then you want to load test it before you put it into production. The fact that you can spin up large fleets of servers in EC2 and then use those servers to generate load against your application, regardless of where it's running, whether you choose to use it running in EC2 or, in this case, in your own data center, is also really valuable, and that you can quickly, you'd much rather sort of have a sense of where your where your application's weaknesses are or where it might fall down, rather than your customers figuring that out when the application becomes very popular or just through day-to-day usage. Next slide. So finally, what we also see is very agile, very sort of literate organizations. You develop a very nimble, much more efficient way of deploying their applications. So a lot of our customers, when they come to us, they basically they have 3 times the investment they should in their IT infrastructure. They have a development fleet, a staging fleet, and a production fleet. And so we have a number of customers who have gone to a model where they'll have a staging and development fleet. They're one. They can develop an environment that looks very close to real time because of the flexibility EC2 gives you. And then once they're ready to cut from staging to production, they use a feature of EC2 called elastic IP addresses to just remap that IP address from the production fleet to the staging fleet. So really staging becomes production almost instantaneously. And then they'll keep the production fleet running for a few days or weeks just to make sure that everything's okay. If there is a hiccup, you can just map that IP address back to your old production fleet, again within minutes. And then, when they decide that things are stable, they turn off the production fleet and the process starts again. This means that you can go through many more successful iterations of deployment of new features or functionality for your application. It also means that the pace of those can be much faster and hence add a lot more value to your business much more quickly with a cloud environment than with the traditional IT environment. So with that, I'll hand things back over to Michael for the next parts of the presentation.
Thanks, Martin. Boy, it's really exciting when you think, and those, of course, are use cases we see every day with RightScale, the agility, the load testing, the roll forward, roll back in terms of staging, development, and production environments. And it's just very exciting to see real companies using the cloud every day in those ways. I wanted to say a word from the RightScale point of view about what's driven interest in past webinar surveys that we've done in having a cloud management platform on top of Amazon. And really, these are the responses we got. People are interested, along the lines that you mentioned, Martin, in simplifying and focusing what they do, so they're interested in managing complexity. Even though there's tremendous power at every level of the stack here, we'll all note that by providing turnkey solutions at each level, there's great value there. Automation is another big one, everything from scaling up and down to failover scenarios, et cetera. There are many forms of automation that are built into RightScale. Having a fast on-ramp into the cloud. So many of the customers and prospects we speak with are already convinced that they'd like to move to the cloud. They see the benefits, there's no question. They just want a pathway that makes it easy and quick. And at the same time, they want to be able to make that move with a factor of trust. And that's the next item around expertise. So they want to know that when they're moving to this new architecture with all its benefits, that the differences that do exist there are taken into account in a way that conforms to best practices, where there'll be resiliency and redundancy and so on in deployments. Finally, portability, and we saw this in spades. I think it was last December when Martin, when Amazon released the new cloud in the UK, and Amazon EU, I think it's called, for Europe, really was implemented as a separate cloud in many ways for good reasons having to do with privacy laws, et cetera. But the ability to move across from the US cloud to the UK cloud was an important element in people's decision making. So just a quick picture of where RightScale fits in the larger world. Again, companies looking to run applications in the cloud, whether they're test and dev or production websites or grids, whatever. And then they have these resources along Amazon US, Europe, CloudFront, all the other Amazon Web Services, Eucalyptus, and finally future services, which we all hope will be coming elsewhere in the world from Amazon. And RightScale sits in the middle, again, powering the automation, powering cloud-ready solutions, one of which we'll talk specifically a little bit later is the cohesive FT VPN Cube solution, and then finally adding services both for onboarding, consulting, design, and ongoing support. So a quick picture again for those who are somewhat new to the cloud. There's a model out there often called the SPI model. Stands for Software as a Service, Platform as a Service, and Infrastructure as a Service. And the players that you're hearing from today really exist in this right-hand area of infrastructure as a service with a multitude of cloud resources that are very flexible and open. And so you see on the X and Y axes that this is the area where you get more choice and transparency. So the dotted line kind of represents the fact that there's complete freedom in choosing operating system, what kind of database or data model you might want to use, programming environment and programming language, a whole variety of applications. There's the greatest freedom and transparency there, while also achieving the automation that you see in the other cloud models. One particular architecture that RightScale's innovated that I wanted to call out is what we call server templates. And server templates are important because they power dynamic configuration of virtual machines in the cloud environment. Specifically, server templates allow the dynamic runtime configuration of virtual instances as they're booting up. And we'll see more from that during the demo from Ed. But again, the key is that using this kind of architecture in the cloud allows great agility and flexibility in how you design and run deployments, as well as high level of automation. And one big side benefit is that the deployments that you run suddenly become very predictable. You know exactly what's going to happen every time you launch a new server or cluster of servers. So finally, in terms of test and development, here's a picture of what that might look like under RightScale before we launch into the VPN Cube portion. You can use Amazon EC2, as Martin mentioned, to generate load. You can use Amazon EC2 to create very complicated, or I should say powerful and complex clusters of servers that are tied into other AWS resources like S3, the Elastic Block Store, etc., and manage all that from within the RightScale dashboard. So now, without further ado, let's launch in. And Patrick Kirpin, I'd invite you to take us through what we'll be seeing, introduce us to VPN Cube, and what we'll be seeing during the live demo.
Hi, thanks, Michael. Very happy to talk to you today about VPN Cube and how working with Amazon Web Services and with the RightScale framework, these three entities can provide you basically loosely coupled automation infrastructure that's very powerful. So our part of this solution is the VPN Cube Overlay Network. It has the word VPN in it, but this is not a VPN. This is an overlay network that does routing. It basically is deployed as a set of virtual appliances that you can think of as bridges, switches, routers, depending upon the configuration. Amazon obviously has a fantastic quality data center. It has the, all sorts of capabilities, and we're not saying that it's insecure. What we're saying is that what you need is an overlay network that gives you control. You want to have the ability to have static addressing. You want to be able to have topology control. You want to be able to use common enterprise services like UDP multicast for service discovery, service election. And you do want to make attestations that you independently have the ability to deliver, deploy, and configure control devices of your own. Part of the enterprise IT checks and balances is the ability as an enterprise IT exec to make attestation of what you're in control of, and that's what we're out to provide with VPN Cube. Next. So Cohesive FT broadly is in the onboarding space. We help do onboarding to public-private hybrid clouds, and a good part of that is getting the right server definition in place and helping the data center to cloud server basically wake up and get to work. So one way of doing that is working with solutions like RightScale, where we can provide our devices as RightScale compliant devices. But part of that is, how does the server wake up? Does he feel like he was back when he was at home in a data center? Does he have his same address? Can he use service discovery? Are you confident in secure communications? Can you communicate securely from your data center to the cloud? And that's what the VPN Cube solution is out to provide. And so, next slide, please. One of our most popular Elastic servers has been VPN Cube. Just to be clear, these are delivered as virtual appliances. They're essentially virtual bridges, switches, and routers that you can deploy to the Amazon cloud. You can deploy to the data center. And we now have these available for use. We've had to date an Amazon EC2 free edition of VPN Cube. And so what's fantastic now is those can now be managed and configured because we essentially have a RightScale edition. So you can connect multiple clouds, for example, Amazon Europe and Amazon USA, or connect your data center to one of those clouds. Next slide, please. So what are the use cases for this? Why do you need an overlay network? Well, again, a very good example is you might just be bringing a set of servers up, clustered Tomcat, a dynamic grid solution like Gigaspaces, something you've written in-house yourself that uses Genie, Java Genie for service discovery or service election. Because you're delivering your own network infrastructure through the VPN Cube managers, you can then use UDP multicast in Amazon. What if you want to make the Amazon subnet, the Amazon VLAN, look like just a subnet of your network, so that you can go out securely over the internet and basically have routable paths to a set of, importantly, static IP addresses that you can reuse every time you come up, every time you relaunch inside your Amazon VLAN. Another use case is, how do you keep using some of your existing infrastructure? If you're a Tivoli shop, if you're a Unicenter shop, and you've done instrumentation specific to one of your applications, as opposed to managing deployments and topologies in Amazon, how do you get that information back into your data center? So we've seen use cases where people merely connect the monitoring infrastructure so that it can go back into their data center network operations center. And then lastly, what we'll be demoing here is a really common use case, which is we've got this fantastic Amazon infrastructure, but what if I want to basically do failover between two significant regions, quite a distance obviously, but I want to have these capabilities, static addressing, secure communication, or the use of multicast between Amazon Europe and Amazon USA. So how you do this between Amazon, you're going to see today with our, and again, you can do it yourself with a free edition that's available for the RightScale platform. And if you want to connect your data center to your Amazon VLANs, then it's a slightly different version of the VPN Cube solution, where you can use virtual appliance managers, or you can use IPsec to EC2. You can use your in-house existing extranet connectivity solution like a Cisco ASA, a PIX, a Juniper, Fortinet, etc. Next slide. And here what we see is the user interface to one of the VPN Cube managers, and I know I've said it at least 3 times so far. Think of these as just like configuring a bridge, a switch, a router, very conventional, but one that you moved into what's essentially a third-party controlled infrastructure. Amazon controls the physical infrastructure. This gives you more fine-grained control of the network infrastructure around your devices. And what you see here, for example, is, in this case, it's a very simple setup. I think 3 managers, but I have only 3 devices in the overlay network. Well, one of the things you have to do to use the overlay network is configure your devices to join the network. They have to be sort of connected in, and that does require some configuration. So one of the amazing things about the power of the RightScale framework is you can basically auto-configure and auto-join a VPN Cube overlay network, which is significantly easier, I can tell you, than doing it by hand. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks very much. This is going to be exciting to see in live action, which is what we'd like to do now. So I'm now going to transfer control of the presentation to Ed Goldberg, who will take us through the live demo. And Ed, just give me a second. While I'm transferring that over, I wanted to say a word to the audience. We got some questions about defining cloud, and we'll all remember there about a third of the audience was pretty new to cloud computing. So just wanted to say a word. You know, those of us who run infrastructure, meaning servers, storage, etc., you may have that in-house in your own data center or your own company, maybe in the server closet. You may have had experience leasing or renting those resources at, for example, a hosting company or a managed hosting company. What's new and different about cloud computing is the ability to get those resources, meaning servers, storage, and other low-level IT infrastructure resources. You can get them across the internet, in this case from Amazon Web Services. They're hosted and managed by Amazon, but what's really new and different is you get these on demand, meaning you can programmatically access these resources through a secure coded channel. You get them through an API call. You can get them whenever you want from a virtually infinite store, and you pay for them as you go. So if you fire up a server, you pay for it at a minimum of 1 hour. If you stop using it, you stop paying for it. Same for storage and same for other resources. So if you put that all together, that's what's really new and different about cloud computing. And with that, Ed, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, what this webinar section is all about is really deploying some servers and really getting out there and doing what we just talked about. And I'll try to bring up at points in the presentation what it is that is demonstrated at this point and what are the important points. But let's start with what I'm going to do. I'm sort of an ops person, and my job is to deploy some servers on behalf of a developer. So I'm going to play the role of ops, and I'm going to fulfill a request from a user that wants to do a comparison between single and dual processor systems in the cloud. And he's requested of me to launch a pair of servers for him, and that pair of servers is going to have a single CPU and a dual CPU, and I'll give him access to both servers, and I'll send him the IP addresses, so he'll be able to launch and he'll be able to use those servers that I have launched. So without further ado, the first thing I'm going to want to do for this user is I'm going to want to create keys. We go to the Clouds menu here, and we go into Creating SSH Keys. These keys allow secure access to the cloud. We're not yet talking about VPN Cube, we're talking about SSH access. As we move up the stack here and talk more complicated networking, we're going to talk about how to use VPN Cube. But for the moment, let's just create a new server. And with that new server, we're going to need new keys. So I'm going to call my new server developer number 2. Okay? And when I enter a key name of developer number 2, 2 actions happen when I do the create. First thing is it creates a key for me to log into the server, and that's what we're now seeing on the screen. And second, it's creating a key that will be used at launch time on the server. There's 2 halves to this piece. So I'm going to save a copy of this because I have to send it to my developer, giving him access. So I'll simply cut and paste a copy of this. Okay? So I've copied that over. Now I'm on a Mac over here, so I'm going to open up a Mac window where all my keys are, and I'm simply going to VI developer number 2's key, okay, and insert using the paste command. It's pretty easy. That key, sure to add a carriage return at the end, and write it out. Next important step, and that's why these webinars are so important, is little tips like this one. You have to chmod this key to be only readable by you, okay? So we're going over to developer number 2 and make sure that it matches all my other keys. Notice they're only readable by me. If you don't do this, you're going to get an error message later. We now have a key for our user. Think of it as a big password if you'd like. But these servers are special. You log into them using SSH with no password. This key is your password to the server. Now that we have a key for our developer number 2, I'm going to go into Manage and then Deployments. And I'm going to start up a new deployment. Now, like any good bake show, we've already got one cooking, so don't worry. Developer number 1 running is available to me, so I don't have to wait for these servers to actually launch. It does take about 3 minutes, but we'll go back and see that our cake that we just put in the oven actually does work. So we'll create a new deployment. This is a container for a group of servers for my developer number 2 here. We're just going to call him dev2 like we did before. I could actually put some info right here about the project, whatever I need. And later, I can decide what zone to put it in. We're going to put this in 1D, the new RightScale, the new Amazon Zone D. I now have a container for my new project, for my new developer, and all of his servers are now living within this container. This is nice because now as an ops person, I can manage lots of different deployments and lots of different pieces. I can now search in my EU and my US servers to pick out templates. Thorsten and everybody's talked about templates and the idea of building a configuration. I've set up configurations for my developers, which are their standard LAMP stack templates. So I'm going to add an EC2 US server template from my private template store for my developers. And I've created both a single and a dual CPU template here. So let's go down here to the bottom, try not to scroll. So I have a LAMP single and a LAMP dual. So let's grab our single, and we're going to name him single. So I now have, there we go. I now have a single server. Important, we use our new key here. That's why we had to make the key first, people. If you make the key first, you can answer this menu. Then you can put them in a a security group. A security group decides from the EC2 level, not the VPN Cube level now, the EC2 level, which servers can talk to which servers over the 10 dot network. Later we'll talk about the 172 network. What availability zone we want it in? I set the default as D, the new zone at Amazon EC2. Turn off associate IP at launch. That's a wonderful facility to have a static external IP for each server. Didn't need it for this one, so I haven't set it up. I now have set up my first of the two servers requested. I have a single CPU server. In Amazon speak, we call that a small, but I wanted to use sort of popular words. So I set up a small server, which is a single CPU. Now we're going to have one more server, a second server. Remember, our developer wanted to do a comparison between servers of 1 and 2 CPUs. This is what we call medium, by the way, in EC2 speak. So this is our dual speaker, our dual machine. Okay? Once again, I want to give him the same key because I want him to have access to his user and put him in the same security group. The same deployment is in the same area or zone of EC2. This is a failure zone. Machines in different zones can talk to each other, but not as well as in the same zone. Servers in the same zone have faster priority to talk to each other, and there's no cost to talk to each other. So we'll talk about failure groups in another webinar, but for the moment, launch all your servers in the same zone for best performance. So now we have our two servers up here and running. I can have hundreds of servers in this deployment. I've launched hundreds of servers in the deployment. So I wanted to show you at this point, by doing both servers at once, that if I had lots of servers in here, I can launch them all at once with this button right here, the Start All button. And the Start All button allows me to launch a group of servers. Now, up to this point in time, I'm not paying anything to AWS. The clock's not running. So if I go off and have a cup of coffee, let me take a sip right now, or I decide to launch my servers tomorrow, I'm not paying yet. The minute I click this button, I'm going to allocate servers and start paying. And if I decide to stop them, I'll stop paying for a while. Which means that for my developer, I don't need 24/7 servers, and I don't need to launch servers I don't need until I actually need them. So if I needed this set of servers at 1 o'clock this afternoon, I'd come back at 1 o'clock this afternoon and I'd push the Start All button. So when I start the servers, it informs me, would you really want to do this? It may be a lot of money. It may be something you want to do. I say, yes, it's now going to launch them. The RightScale, come on, pop-up, go away. There we go. The RightScale dashboard then informs me with an up arrow here, these machines are coming up. They're pending allocation in EC2. And in a moment, if we look over here in the recent activity, you'll see that the single and the double servers are pending. But like any good bake show, I don't want to wait the 3 minutes. I want to dive right into the next step of our demo. But we'll come back, and please watch the recent activity over here to see what's going on. I already have a cake in the oven, which is developer number 1 running. So let's talk a little bit while those servers are booting about the detail of what we can see in here. First of all, you see both of the servers are up and running. They're very similar to the ones I ran before because they come from the same template. In other words, once I've built a template, I can launch it as many times as I want, and I can launch it that quickly. Look at how quickly I fulfilled a request from a developer to launch servers. Within 3 to 5 minutes, I can send that email saying your servers are ready. Monitoring. You can monitor the servers to see how well they're doing. Obviously, my servers are quite idle. In a real deployment, I'm sure they'd be used a lot harder, but it's nice to be able to see whether my developer actually logged in and used my servers. I can see what sort of scripts are available to my servers, what volumes in the EBS volume set are used. This is part of the storage that Martin talked about, available storage, sort of like plugging a USB dongle into a server and getting more storage. But without further ado, let's find out what these servers are really doing. I'm going to dive into our dual CPU server and see what it actually does. As part of its template, when it was launched, it put up a small website. If I click on this link, which is its external IP address, you can see this complicated website has hello world, which is the standard Unix way of saying it works, as its web server. So we now know it has a live Apache, it's running correctly, and it's up and running. So it's time to go tell my developer that this server is ready to use. And the next thing he's going to want to do is log into this server. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this IP address. Remember, that's the external IP address of that server. I'm going to go back to my SSH console over here, and I'm going to use, remember, this has to be developer 1. That's the mistake I made in the previous one. Make sure I have the right key. No, I have the default key in here. So we're actually going to log into a different server. And I'm going to log into the server using the keys we've used before. So as you can see, with the key, and with the SSH command, and I'm going to highlight something really important here. Root at. It's really important when you SSH in. First of all, you use the right key for that server, and you remember to use the root at in your SSH command line. That'll make sure you log in with no password, like I did right now, which allows me to do not only SSH command, but remote execution of SSH commands onto my server. So even though it's virtual, I'm really there. I can really see what's going on in these servers. And it's really nice because now I can actually go into them and look at their databases. Let's just go into MySQL and see what's going on in there. Show databases. See what's going on this LAMP server. As you can see, it has a running database up in the server. So you get an idea of what's going on with launching servers. And as I said in the other portion, our servers over here are in fact booting and doing well. In another minute or so, we're cranking along pretty fast. They'll be up and running, and I'll show you that they're running. But right now, they're actually in the process of running each of the write scripts. Interestingly enough, our dual server is beating our single server to boot. Interesting that dual servers boot a little faster than single CPU servers. So I got one of those up. Now I'd like to move over to our VPN Cube deployment. Now see how I've moved everything into different groups, and I can focus my attention from one group to the other within my deployment and control each one. In this deployment, now note they're all in the same AWS account. I'm spending money on 4 servers, and one of them, the 5th server, is defined, but it's not turned on. So I'm not spending money on that one. It's just defined. I can turn it on whenever I need to. Okay? In this deployment, I have a VPN Cube Manager 1 and a VPN Manager 2, and these 2 managers are one in the US and the other in the EU. Now, hold on here. Think about this. I'm looking at a single dashboard. I'm now looking at multiple projects. A project for my developer, a project for VPN Cube. One of my servers is in the EU. One is in the US. And I'm doing this all from a single login, from a single dashboard. And I can actually see what's going on in each one of these servers. Okay? So in this particular case, these 2 VPN servers are being used as virtual appliances to allow my PHP server, which just happens to be in the EU, and let's delve down into him for a moment, to communicate back to the database, which is in the US. That's pretty outrageous. I now have an application running in the EU in the cloud using a database in the US over secure VPN tunneling. I'm going to go to his web server. Remember, we saw Hello World on the other one. Let's hope this one's a little more interesting. Okay, very good. So this is the public view of a PHP program that basically connects to the 172, not 10 dot. For everybody who knows AWS well, the internal addresses are all 10 dot. This is a 172 overlay network, and he's read a little bit out of the database. That's pretty cool. Now we have a remote server is actually reading from PHP on a server in the US, which is running MySQL. So let's dive into the US side of this server and see how he sees the world. Or let's dive into the EU server and see how he sees the world. A little bit of each and find out what's going on. So let's look at the PHP program we actually saw and how he sees the world in the VPN Overlay Network. Okay? So one way of getting to our computers, our servers, is through the SSH pop-up console. I showed you before that you can actually do it using any SSH you want, but RightScale also provides this lovely pop-up which allows you to get in through SSH from any computer, which is really nice. Note it remembered the key for you, remember the IP address, remember not to forget root at before it does it, and all those nice things. So I'm going to type the standard command for Unix for finding more about the network. I'm going to ask Patrick to chime in here and explain to me, what's that third network adapter here? What's tunnel all about?
Hi, Ed. Thanks. The VPN Cube is an overlay network, but it's constructed out of a number of well-known projects. For example, OpenVPN helps with the tunneling, Quagga helps with the routing, RabbitMQ helps with the protocol redistribution. So what we've done is these devices are, of course, still on the Amazon network on ETH0, and they can follow the normal security group rules over ETH0. But if you configure them to only run the tunneling traffic over ETH0, all the rest of your traffic then by IP address configuration goes over this tunnel 0. So it's just a separate interface carried on the back of a VPN tunneling strategy as part of the overlay network, providing the static addressing as the VPN Cube managers share one overlapping set of addresses if that's what you require, making your devices in your data center, Amazon Europe and Amazon USA appear as if they're on one local area network.
Okay, so you're telling me that what everybody set up till now, that the local IP addresses of EC2 servers were always dynamic, isn't true. I can now have static IP addresses so I can find my database with a well-known IP?
Yes, if you've ever moved a database server around, lots of times you need to have things have the actual IP address or sometimes resolved to the same address. This takes that burden away. Again, the difference between just a purely VPN connection, which you could do in certain scenarios, roll by hand. Here in this case, you can be multi-cloud, multi-data center, multi-network, and have routable addressing across all the locations, as well as protocol redistribution.
Wow, that really, I feel like Mythbusters today. It busts the myth. I'm sure you're going to tell me other things that you've changed. So now with Elastic IPs, we have fixed external IPs, and with VPN Cube, we have fixed internal IPs. And I wanted to show the inside of that page we just saw a minute ago. Not the hello world one, that would be very interesting, but the one that actually accessed the database. Remember, I'm logged into a server right now in the EU. Now I'm going to look at the inside of that index.php. Obviously, I have exited the editor one time before, and you can see the PHP code for people who are familiar with PHP is actually connecting. So now you see the real password to my server. I won't use that password again. And you can see it's using the 172.31.1.5 to get to the database. That's the well-known internal IP address of the database that's not going to change. So when I relaunch that database and I use the internal IP address, it's going to say that same IP address. What other features am I going to get outside of static IPs for my database, which is good enough already? Do I get multicast?
Well, again, you know, lots of enterprise software uses service discovery, service election using things like Java Genie. Some of the grid computing products that also are partners with RightScale. People like Gigaspaces who have a very dynamic basically self-annealing computational solution. It really works great to be able to launch servers and just have them find the grid automatically by just auto-launching and auto-joining them as part of the overlay network.
Well, that's really interesting. I used that time here to launch a new SSH console because I wanted to see both halves of this equation side by side. Now I've logged into, on the same screen, I can have a lot of logins here. The database server. Now notice the database server's tunnel address. Let's get those side by side so you can see what's going on here. Is the same address. So here's a login to the database server, and he's announcing himself on tunnel 0 to be 1.5. He's actually talking to 1.5, and if I were to look over here to his database, MySQL, show databases, you can see that the database that I connected to right there is in fact the database that's over here. So we now have a ability to log into both sides of the tunnel. Look at this. I can control the static IPs on both ends of the tunnel. And I think the gotcha here is it's so easy. It's so easy to be able to now create an overlay network that allows me to have static IPs inside the network and secure tunnels between the US and EU. But I know Crandall's just bouncing full of questions here, and I'd like to open questions for a moment. While he's bringing up a few questions for us, I'll let Patrick look a little bit at the external runtime status of VPN Cube and explain that. So could you tell me a little bit more about what I can see from this administration panel on my VPN Cube appliance?
Yeah, here we see the devices, in this case, one in Europe, one in the USA, which appear to be on on the network. You see here that it has access to the other remote managers, so you've a peered network of routers. And the VPN Cube administration tools, what they do is they let you set up your credentials because devices join the overlay network via X509 credentials, generate those and distribute them. And then you also from here can actually knock clients off of a manager so that they go to their rollover list and fail over to a different manager in the case you're doing maintenance. So that's what that little disconnect button there is for. And again, one of the fun things about this is if you use the IPsec to EC2 connectivity solution, this 172 network being essentially a routable subnet from any machine on your network if you choose, they don't have to be members of the overlay network. They literally just use your normal extranet connectivity and routing systems to reach a set of machines that, as far as they know, are on your network.
Okay, explain to me these client packs. Does this mean I can have 20 clients for both of my servers for the free edition? Is that how it's going to work?
Sure, it's 20. This is a pre-configured 172 subnet. Obviously, we can customers in the more advanced editions can define their own subnet range. But with the free edition, you can basically connect 20 devices to the overlay network in total, not per manager, because really we're talking the overlay network, not just a single manager.
Ah, very good. Well, let me go back and let's see what's going on with our ones. Just for truth in advertising, did my deployment for developer number 2 actually launch correctly? And let's go back and see that, in fact, they actually launched about 10 minutes ago. I think we're doing fine on timing. And here are my 2 new servers. They've been running 11 minutes and 7 seconds. Here's my dual and single CPU servers. Let's try out the dual this time and see what it's doing. And you can see that it's launched. It got an IP address. How long did it take to launch this one? Oh, 1.9 minutes to launch. That's not bad. One of the nice features by there is audits. Just in case you missed all those pop-ups, this tells you when it was booted, when it was launched, how much money you're spending. And the minute you're through with this server and you're done with what you're doing, it's just as easy to turn them off. And that's really one of the important points I want to leave with you, is it's really great to be able to turn servers on demand for my clients and for my developers here. It's also very, very important to be able to push this button and stop the spending. So at this point, my developer number 2 said, I really didn't need those servers, and that 20 cents that I spent on the double and the 10 cents that I spent on the single CPU ends right here. So this talks to the point of agility. We can start servers and stop servers dynamically on behalf of our developers. We can give them SSH access directly to the servers, and through the console, of course, you can do all this. So Crandell, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, we're getting lots of questions in over the line, but first of all, thank you, Ed. Thanks, Patrick. That's, you know, your use of the cooking show metaphor got several remarks. I think you guys put Julia Childs to shame.
Couldn't do without Patrick.
Patrick, first one I'll direct to you. The question is, are there RightScale server templates available now to start using Cohesive FT?
Yes, that's as of this webinar, the VPN Cube for EC2 free edition for the RightScale environment is now available and should be, I believe, in either the public or partner section.
What I was told before the show was when you click on the partners template over here, that it's going to show up slightly after the webinar. We're going to send everyone that attended this webinar an email explaining exactly what the name is of the partner template. We can go search now and see if they made it for the webinar, but if they didn't, don't fret. There'll be an email right after the webinar that'll show you the name of our partners' templates. So it'll be here under Design, Server Templates, then click on Partners, and then look on this list for the new server template for the VPN appliance. The second piece is under WriteScripts. WriteScript is the script you add to each one of your clients of VPN Cube, not the appliance itself, but how you attach to the clients. And that one's already here. It's called the VPN Cube Client Connect. But Don't fret, there'll be an email after the show, and it'll tell you exactly what the exact names of these are, and we do update them from time to time. So notice over here the dates and times, and they will update as we see new versions of them and fix problems or bugs. So I hope that covers your questions. Use your Design tab in the RightScale dashboard and launch it from the server templates from partners and server write scripts from partners.
Thanks. Next question, Martin. I'll direct this one to you. I think it's a low-level AWS question. The person wrote, I need to test on multiple OSs. Can I set up cloud instances of XP, I think meaning Windows XP, Win 2000, Vista, Ubuntu, Mac OS, and run all my automated tests simultaneously?
So there's a qualified answer or a qualified yes to that question. So qualified meaning that there's a list of operating systems that we support on the website. At a high level, we support almost all the various flavors of Linux, Ubuntu, RHEL, Fedora, the list goes on. Windows Server 2003 and Open Solaris. So within that range, yes, you can set up any of the different sort of servers that you need to run your testing.
Great. And one follow-on, maybe somewhat related question also for you, Martin. Can I use the same license for dev and test environments that I purchased for my production environment?
So that really, in a sense, Amazon behaves like a hardware vendor rather than a hosting provider. So that depends on which software you're using. In other words, who the vendor is and what their licensing agreement is. At this point, almost most of the major and many of the sort of lower level ISVs have changed their licensing. So IBM, almost their entire suite is licensed actually by the hour on our platform. We're a supported platform for Oracle, for MySQL, and a host of other applications. So again, it really depends on the application you're talking about, but in general, the answer is yes.
Great, thanks, Martin. Here's one I think for you, Patrick, and you, Ed. What is the difference between using the tunnel interface and the elastic IP address to provide a database with a static IP?
So when you normally when you use Amazon, when you relaunch an instance or an image into an instance, you get a new usually 10.10, etc. address. In this case, using VPN Cube and RightScale together, you can have your devices the deployment that you've configured, as Ed showed, you can have those things essentially launch with a pre-specified address. So you basically can now have static addressing, similar to what people do in their data centers. We normally don't use DHCP addresses in our data centers for our server infrastructure. They're generally less happy living in a lava lamp.
Well, there's another part to this. You'll notice when I logged into my databases, I didn't use any passwords. I'm behind the firewall. So when I use the external WAN address and I were to open it up to my database, it would mean that any user that knew my IP address could go to port 3306 with the password and the username for root, which just happens to be blank, and log into my database. That wouldn't be very good and wouldn't represent good security. And also, if they were to eavesdrop on the communications between my MySQL client and my MySQL server, they'd be seeing in plain text or perhaps compressed text what's going on between my two servers. Whereas with VPN Cube, using the internal overlay network, first of all, the entire communications is encrypted, so what you'd see is an encrypted stream, and you wouldn't be able to actually see that it's a MySQL conversation going on. And also, all of those passwords are now converted over into those very fancy keys we saw before, which are uncrackable or nearly uncrackable. So now we have a secure connection between the EU and the US with encrypted communication, which, as you can see from the PHP code, didn't require a lot of the application programmer other than using the 172 address instead of the 10. Address. So secure communications done simply and very simply from the PHP programmer's point of view.
Great. Ed, I'm going to ask you to pass control back to me, if you would, so we can put up the final slide with, we're coming toward the end of the hour, but we still have a load of questions. So for those of you who need to move on to other business, thanks for joining us. However, I would ask the panelists, please stay online if you would for another 10 minutes or so. We have a whole pile of questions here. And those of you who do have time to stay on and listen to the questions, you're most welcome to. If you need to go, here's some contact information for all three companies that you can use to follow up if you have further inquiries. But let me go ahead then with follow-on questions. One of them is, Martin, I'll direct this to you. There are a lot of questions about getting data onto AWS and S3. Specific question, if one wanted to upload a ½ terabyte to S3, what would be the most efficient way to do that?
So at that scale, probably you can do that, depending upon your upstream web connection. You should be able to do that in sort of roughly, a day, probably even a half a day. Sort of rule of thumb is there are some best practices around opening up multiple simultaneous connections to S3 and pushing the data upstream that way. And you can usually do rough numbers around a terabyte a day. If you need to get it faster than that, then you can look into our ingestion service for S3, which involves you sending us physical hard drives, which we then sort of suck that data off the hard drive and into S3 directly.
Great. Another question, probably any of you. Is there a mechanism available, or what mechanism is available to guarantee bandwidth between my data center and the cloud?
Well, the bandwidth provided by EC2 is under your control. So for each AWS account, you're going to get an allocation of bandwidth. Martin, that's an interesting question. If I were to have two EC2 servers, have you found that the bandwidth from one server talking to the WAN interferes with another server talking to the WAN? I haven't seen any interference.
No. So a couple sort of comments about bandwidth in EC2. So first of all, just it stands to reason. Logically, it's a virtual environment. So these are virtual servers, and such that the smaller the virtual server, the more you're putting on a physical host, and the more contention there is on the physical network interface. So if you need, rule of thumb is if you need more bandwidth, go a size larger on the instances, and you're going to get less contention on the physical NIC. In terms of bandwidth performance between your physical data center and EC2, we are getting increasing questions about that. Historically, people have connected over the open internet, but we are starting to see more and more enterprise applications. Particularly as we've supported some partners like IBM, like Oracle, MySQL, and others, where you have some components of your infrastructure that run inside your own data centers, and then some infrastructure in the cloud. Requests for things like lease line connections, MPLS connections, things like that. It's something we're thinking about. It's something that in our world, manual equals cost, and so we're thinking about, is there a business case for this? It seems like there is. We're also thinking about how we can make it as seamless as possible for a good customer experience, and also to keep our costs down. So if there's a specific operational need for that, feel free to contact me. We'd love to sort of talk to you about that more and sort of learn about what your requirements are.
But the other thing, Martin, is if you really wanted to avoid contention perhaps between a high bandwidth video download and your website, if you launch the high video bandwidth on one server and you do your website on another server, they'll be pretty contention free, won't they?
Yeah, so bandwidth, at a high level, bandwidth is one of those things that we massively over-provision in the cloud. And so because of the way the EC2, we place those virtual machines within our data center, there's no contention within your account. There isn't a concept of specific allocation of bandwidth to your account per se. So again, there'd be no contention at all.
So the allocation of a server is for a server, and account is just a container of a collection of servers, but doesn't limit the bandwidth for your account in any way.
Exactly. So there's no concept of I've only got X amount of bandwidth for my account. It's more, the constraint there is more how much will the network interface and the individual virtual server support.
On a per server basis, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Michael.
Great. Follow-on question. If you provide control of cloud environment, can you limit control of the network resources used by any one environment? Or perhaps that means user or server?
Absolutely, yes. One of the things I could have demonstrated a moment ago is those two servers that I launched in what's called a security zone. And in that zone, I can decide, much like any firewall, what they get to see and who they get to talk to. In the examples I gave of server 1 and server 2, I actually launched them into zones so they actually can't see each other. Okay? Martin, do you have anything to add to that way of control? Because there's a lot of facility there.
Yeah, we provide some pretty, when you layer, the cohesive T stuff on top of our platform, you get a lot of fine-grained control of the network layer. So, at a high layer, you can, there's the concept which we touched on briefly of security groups, which is a per port, per protocol, and per IP address basis of filtering who gets access to your groups, and groups are user-defined. There's a default group, but you can define your own. Also for control within our infrastructure, as a best practice, for durability, one of the things inside Amazon is that thou shalt not deploy your application in a single data center, because in our experiences, data centers occasionally break. So hence we expose the ability to spread your application across multiple data centers through the use of zones, and that can be quite useful from a networking perspective, because one of the things that can break in a data center is some guy looking for the sewer line digs up your fiber connection. It's happened.
Oh yeah, I've been there with that one. And Patrick, inside the VPN Cube network, you get a lot of control over the overlay network, which lays on top of all that. And that allows you to do what sort of things? Can you migrate IPs between servers?
Sure. The way that the framework works, because of we have great partners in the OpenVPN project, the RabbitMQ project, Quagga project, and the way the technology is collectively configured. One of the neat things is essentially if you have stateless servers, your page servers, some of your servlet containers, things like that, you can basically give one of them the X509 credentials, to be 172.30.1.1, let's say. And if you revoke that instance's credentials and in essentially the same command give those credentials to a machine running, let's say, in Amazon Europe, within a second or so, the routing tables are updated, and you've essentially done, stateless server migration in a matter of seconds as an artifact of how things join the overlay network.
So essentially what EIP has done for external IP address or WAN addresses, VPN Cube does for internal IP addresses, both fixed and migrating addresses to the servers. I mean, that's a huge addition.
Yes. Here, I'll throw a few more questions in before we sign off. Here are two related questions. The first one is, how can you control costs, i.e. keep developers from launching too many servers or keeping them running for a long time? And then a related question, can I launch for a predefined amount of time and automatically shut off?
Yes to both questions. First of all, keep your developers from launching servers by themselves and you'll control your costs. Developers will launch servers and then walk off and have lunch. You've got to make sure that you keep control over how servers get launched and make sure they get turned off. It's too easy for a developer to launch a server on Friday that he needs for Monday, and thinking in the old world that I've got to make sure I reserve one just so I won't get one on Monday, because there's always that rush on Mondays. That's not true in EC2. When you need the server, you use it. When you don't need it, you turned it off. You noticed in my webinar that I'm very green. Even though I hadn't used the full hour of my extra servers, I turned them off immediately. Turn them on when you need them. Turn them off when you don't need them. It's as easy as typing the shutdown command either under Windows or the shutdown command under Unix, and the machine will decommission itself and take itself off. From the developer's point of view. From the RightScale console point of view, you can both do time starts and time stops, and you can terminate with force any server at any time, as you saw me do during the webinar. So yes, you can control your costs, and you can watch exactly what the costs are. If we have the dashboard up right now, the other nice thing is you can audit your current spend rate, both by the day, the week, and the month, and get approximations. And I'll let Martin talk a little bit more about the console and what you're capable of doing in watching your roll-ups. There are wonderful spreadsheets, right, that you can download to see exactly what you're spending on each server. So, Martin, why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
I would also add that for EC2, each EC2 account, just by default, just to kind of limit our financial liability, has a cap of 20 virtual machines associated with it. That cap can be set to whatever you need it to be. You just have to ask us. But what that also means is that for individual developers, what you can do is say, look, your development account has 20 machines. If you need more, come ask me. And that can be kind of a natural break on how many machines a given developer can start on a given account at any sort of specific time.
So there's 20 servers, there's 5 EIPs,
Yes.
there's 100 S3 volume, buckets. There's 500 snapshots. What other limits do we have? I got to remember all my limits.
I don't remember off the top of my head. There's also, I think, the number of EBS volumes to start.
And the number of EBS volumes is how many?
I
We'll
don't
ask that
remember
one
off
of
the
the
top of my
audience.
head.
Somebody can tell me what the number is. But yes, there are spending limits on everything. Also, it's possible to track through the RightScale dashboard during the day. I can see what my spending is and which servers are up and down at all times. And it's really possible to really track your costs at a very fine-grained level. Also, from the RightScale monitoring dashboard, it's possible to see if the developer actually logged in and is using the server, and to ring them up and say, hey, you asked for a server, you didn't even log in. Do you want me to just turn it off? So that type of control is also there to see that you're actually using what you've launched. Back to you, Crendell.
Okay, good. Last question. Can I centrally estimate performance of an application which is running on hundreds of virtual servers?
Okay, who's going to answer that question?
Anyone
Centrally?
care to take that? I think what this question may be around predictability of performance.
Okay,
Yeah,
let
could you
me
get some clarification on that? I mean, again, we do have lots of customers that run hundreds or thousands of servers. One of the advantages from a dev and test perspective is that it's the consistency with which that EC2 gives you in terms of the metrics, the performance characteristics of your machines. But so I'm not sure if I quite understand. I'd like to have a better understanding.
I think that's what the question is about, Martin, and I think you guys have done a great job of pretty accurately specifying what performance you can expect from every type of instance that you launch.
Right, and what we demonstrated with our developer here is that you can just launch a server and give it a try, too. It only costs 10 cents to launch a small server for an hour and run a little bit of your application and see how well it fits that server size and how well it performs. And then you go to a medium, a large, an extra large, compute extra large. There are plenty of server sizes to try. But I would say your mileage may vary. And the biggest question is how embarrassingly parallel is your application? How well does it spread over multiple servers, over multiple CPUs? So the answer is it depends.
Good, and to end on a lighthearted note here, last question that came in, I need to control my servers from the bar. Is there a RightScale iPhone app yet? Well, I don't know that we'd recommend controlling your servers from the bar, but I think that that question gets the right spirit of the cloud, which is the incredible control that all of us get over vast resources, really from almost anywhere, and alleviating the need for companies of any size to invest heavily in the resources that are involved. So in that spirit, I'd like to thank you, Martin. Thank you, Patrick. Thanks, Ed, for joining us today. And thanks to all of our visitors who listened in. We will be following up on every single question and doling them out to the right company to answer them. And so you can expect those answers by email if we didn't have time to address them live today. So thanks very much for joining us. And for those of you who have colleagues that weren't able to attend, we have been recording this webinar, and it will be posted later today on rightscale.com/webinars. So thanks very much, everybody.